They went to bed on an ordinary evening. The baker on Via dell'Abbondanza had set his dough to rise for the morning. A dog was chained in the vestibule of a modest house near the Stabian Gate. In the harbor, merchants had unloaded amphorae of garum and olive oil, and the scent of roasting pine nuts still lingered in the autumn air. Children slept in their mothers' arms. Lovers whispered in the shadows of the forum. And above them all, silent and vine-covered, Mount Vesuvius stood like a guardian, its slopes thick with wild boar and grapevines. Its fertile soil the very reason these people had built their lives here. Not a single soul in that city understood that the mountain was not a mountain at all. It was a loaded weapon, and it had been cocked for 1,700 years. To understand what happened to Pompeii, you first need to understand what Pompeii was, because the tragedy of that day is not simply that people died. The tragedy is what was lost. Pompeii was not some dusty provincial outpost on the edge of the Roman Empire. It was a thriving cosmopolitan city of between 11,000 and 20,000 people, situated on the Bay of Naples in the Campania region of southern Italy, one of the most beautiful and coveted stretches of coastline in the ancient Mediterranean. The city sat at the mouth of the river Sarno, positioned at a crossroads where goods arriving by sea were funneled inland toward Rome along the Great Appian Way. It was a city of merchants and manufacturers, of farmers and fishermen, of aristocrats who kept summer villas with frescoed walls and mosaic floors so intricate they would take your breath away 2,000 years later. The son of Emperor Augustus owned property here. Rumors circulated that Emperor Tiberius himself kept a villa near neighboring Herculaneum. When the wealthiest and most powerful people on earth wanted to escape the chaos of Rome, they came here, to this gleaming white city by the sea, where the wine was excellent, the views were staggering, and the earth was generous beyond reason. The first pillar of Pompeii's prosperity was its volcanic soil, though its residents had no concept of what that meant. The black, mineral-rich earth around Vesuvius was the legacy of eruptions that had occurred long before human memory. Farmers exploited this extraordinary fertility with vineyards and orchards that produced yields far exceeding the quotas set by Roman agricultural law. The Roman writer Columella recommended each vineyard produce 3 culei of wine per jugerum, but the land around Pompeii routinely surpassed this. The city became famous for a local wine called Vesuvinum, produced from grapes grown on the very slopes that would one day destroy everything. Olive oil, cereals, fruits, and vegetables poured from the surrounding fields into the city's markets. This was a place of abundance, a place where nature seemed impossibly generous, and no one stopped to wonder why. The second pillar was trade. Pompeii's port connected it to commercial networks spanning the entire Mediterranean. Ships arrived laden with exotic goods from distant shores, spices from the east, ivory from Africa, silk that had traveled thousands of miles along routes from China, glassware from Egypt, and amphorae of garum, that pungent fermented fish sauce that Romans put on virtually everything. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of trade connections reaching as far as Afghanistan, where Roman glassware from workshops near the Bay of Naples has been found among the Bagram treasures. The city boasted more than 40 bakeries, at least 130 bars and taverns, countless workshops for cloth dyeing and wool processing, and a commercial infrastructure that would be recognizable to any modern entrepreneur. Walking down Via dell'Abbondanza, the city's main commercial artery, you would have passed Thermopolia, the ancient Roman equivalent of fast food counters, with holes in their marble counters where terracotta containers held warm food ready for customers on the go. Pompeii was not merely alive, it was buzzing. The third pillar was culture and spectacle. The city had a 20,000-seat amphitheater built around 70 BC, making it one of the oldest surviving Roman amphitheaters in the world. It had an Odeon for musical performances, grand public baths that served as the social epicenters of daily life, and a forum that was the beating heart of civic existence lined with temples, courts, and market halls. The walls of the city were covered in graffiti, not the vandalism we imagine, but a vivid, unfiltered record of everyday thought. Electoral slogans jostled with declarations of love and crude jokes. One famous inscription reads simply, "Gaius was here." Another announces, "Successus the weaver loves the innkeeper's slave girl." The walls of Pompeii spoke, and what they said was profoundly, irreversibly human. The city even had a notorious brothel, the Lupanar, and its walls adorned with explicit frescoes that served as a kind of menu for visiting sailors who did not speak Latin. Pompeii was alive in every sense that a city can be alive. Raucous, commercial, sensual, political, and deeply interconnected with the wider world. But while the citizens of Pompeii went about their daily lives, buying bread and arguing in the forum and bathing in the warm waters of the Stabian baths, something was happening beneath their feet that none of them could perceive. The same geological forces that had created their impossibly rich soil were building pressure. In the year 62 AD, a devastating earthquake struck the region, causing widespread damage to Pompeii and its neighbor Herculaneum. Buildings cracked, temples shifted on their foundations. The Forum was badly damaged. The Roman historian Tacitus recorded a riot in the amphitheater in 59 AD between citizens of Pompeii and the nearby town of Nuceria, a sign of the social tensions simmering in this volatile region. The earthquake of 62 was a warning, though no one understood it as such. 17 years later, many of the damaged buildings were still being repaired. Workers were still plastering walls and relaying mosaics when the mountain finally spoke. The date has been debated for centuries. For most of history, scholars relied on a 1508 printed copy of a letter written by a 17-year-old boy named Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, known to history as Pliny the Younger. And the traditional date given was August 24th, 79 AD. But recent archaeological evidence has shifted that date. A charcoal inscription discovered in 2018, scrawled by a worker renovating a house, reads, "The 16th day before the calends of November," which corresponds to October 17th. Coins found in the ruins were minted no earlier than late June of that year. The victims' clothing, heavy woolen garments, suggests autumn rather than summer. Stores of autumn fruits, including pomegranates and walnuts, have been found. Most experts now believe the eruption occurred sometime between late October and early November. But regardless of the exact date, the sequence of events is terrifyingly clear. In the days before the eruption, small earthquakes began to shake the region. The tremors grew in frequency and intensity, but the people of Campania were accustomed to seismic activity. They had lived with minor shakes for years, especially since the Great Quake of 62 AD. The warning signs were there, but the Romans lacked any framework for interpreting them. They did not know Vesuvius was a volcano. They thought it was simply a mountain. Its last major eruption had occurred roughly 1,800 years earlier, in the Bronze Age, an event so ancient it existed only in the geological record, not in human memory. The mountain was covered in dense vegetation, crisscrossed with vineyards, home to wild animals. It looked about as threatening as a pastoral painting. The people had no reason to fear it, and every reason to love it. The irony is suffocating. The very thing that made their land so fertile, that drew them to this place, that made their wine famous and their harvests legendary, was the thing that would erase them from the face of the earth. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the mountain exploded. Vesuvius ejected a column of superheated gas, ash, and pulverized pumice to a height of 33 kilometers, roughly 21 miles, into the stratosphere. The eruption released thermal energy equivalent to 100,000 times the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Material was ejected at a rate of 1.5 million tons per second. A massive mushroom cloud, dark and churning, spread across the sky and began to blot out the sun. From across the Bay of Naples, at the naval base of Misenum, a man named Gaius Plinius Secundus, known as Pliny the Elder, watched the cloud rise and later described its shape as resembling an Italian stone pine tree, a tall trunk that spread into branches at the top. This description was so precise that volcanologists would eventually name this type of eruption a Plinian eruption in his honor. At that moment, Pliny the Elder was 55 years old, stout, asthmatic, and the commander of the Roman imperial fleet. He was also the author of a 37-volume encyclopedia of natural knowledge called the Naturalis Historia, one of the most ambitious intellectual projects of the ancient world. When his nephew, the 17-year-old Pliny the Younger, pointed out the strange cloud, the elder Pliny did what a man of insatiable curiosity would do. He ordered his ships launched. For the next 12 hours, a relentless rain of ash and pumice fell on Pompeii. Stones up to 3 inches in diameter hammered down from the sky. The accumulation grew steadily, reaching depths of over 9 feet. Roofs began to collapse under the weight. The air became thick and acrid, choked with sulfurous gas. Darkness fell in the middle of the day, in a blackness so total that Pliny the Younger, watching from Misenum, described it as unlike the darkness of a moonless night, but rather the kind of darkness you experience in a sealed room when the lamp is extinguished. People tied pillows to their heads with cloths, a desperate and heartbreaking defense against the cascading stones. Some fled immediately, streaming out through the city gates with whatever they could carry. Others stayed, sheltering in their homes, trusting that the walls and roofs that had protected them for generations would protect them now. That decision, to stay or to go, became the dividing line between the living and the dead. Meanwhile, Pliny the Elder sailed across the bay toward the disaster. A woman named Rectina, whose villa lay at the foot of Vesuvius, had sent a desperate letter begging for rescue by sea, as there was no escape by land. What had begun as scientific curiosity became a rescue mission. As his ships approached the coast, cinders fell thicker and hotter, and floating rafts of pumice made landing impossible near Rectina's villa. The pilot urged him to turn back. Pliny responded with words that have echoed through history. Fortes fortuna juvat. Fortune favors the brave. Steer to where Pomponianus is. His friend Pomponianus was at Stabiae, a coastal town just a few miles south of Pompeii. There, Pliny went ashore, embraced his terrified friend, took a bath, had dinner, and went to sleep, his loud snoring audible through the door, a performance of calm that was either genuine courage or a deliberate act to soothe those around him. Both interpretations are equally impressive. But the mountain was not finished. In around 1 a.m, 12 hours after the initial explosion, the eruption entered its second and most lethal phase. The towering column of gas and debris, which had reached some 33 kilometers high, began to weaken under its own immense weight. It collapsed, and what came next was something the ancient world had no name for, no concept of, no defense against. Pyroclastic surges, superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and rock fragments, temperatures reaching up to 300 to 400 degrees Celsius, began racing down the flanks of Vesuvius at speeds that may have exceeded 100 kilometers per hour. The first surge struck Herculaneum, a smaller wealthy resort town of about 5,000 people located just 5 miles from the crater. Herculaneum had largely escaped the pumice fall because prevailing winds had blown the column southeast toward Pompeii, and many of its residents had already fled. But those who remained, perhaps 300 people who had crowded into the boat chambers along the waterfront, hoping for rescue by sea, were killed instantly. Their bodies, discovered in 1982, bore ghastly burn marks. Death came not by suffocation alone, but by thermal shock, the flash heating of their blood and soft tissue to the point where skulls exploded from internal steam pressure. By the early hours of the morning, successive pyroclastic surges rolled outward in waves. The fourth surge was the one that reached Pompeii, crashing over the city walls and engulfing everything in its path. Anyone still alive in the city died within seconds. There was no time to run. There was no shelter strong enough. The surge was followed by additional flows that buried the city under a total of 4 to 6 meters of volcanic material, roughly 13 to 20 feet. The city of Pompeii, with its bakeries and brothels, its graffiti and gardens, its forum and frescoes, its sleeping children and chained dogs, ceased to exist. In fewer than 24 hours, a thriving urban center was erased from the surface of the world. And far to the south, at Stabiae, Pliny the Elder woke to find the courtyard of Pomponianus's villa filling with ash. He went down to the beach to see if escape by sea was possible, but the waves were wild and the wind was against them. He lay down on a sailcloth. Then flames appeared, and the smell of sulfur grew overwhelming. The others fled. Pliny tried to stand, supported by 2 slaves, and then collapsed and died, suffocated by the toxic gases. His nephew later wrote to the historian Tacitus that, when his uncle's body was found 2 days later, it was intact and uninjured, still fully clothed, looking more like a man asleep than dead. Estimates of the total death toll vary, but the remains of approximately 2,000 victims have been found at Pompeii alone, with hundreds more at Herculaneum, Stabiae, and the surrounding countryside. The true number is almost certainly higher, as much of the area remains unexcavated. Those 2,000 bodies at Pompeii are not merely statistics. In the centuries after the disaster, as the ash compacted and hardened, the organic matter of the bodies decomposed, leaving hollow cavities in the volcanic rock, perfect molds of human forms in their final moments. In 1863, an Italian archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli, who had been appointed director of excavations at Pompeii, devised a technique that would become his lasting legacy. He poured liquid plaster of Paris into these cavities. When the surrounding ash was carefully chipped away, what emerged were haunting three-dimensional casts of the dead. A man covering his face, a mother clutching an infant, a dog, still chained, twisted in agony, a child curled into a fetal position. Over 1,000 of these casts have now been made, and each one is a gut punch, a visceral collision between the present and a moment of terror frozen for nearly 2 millennia. Some of the victims were found clutching coins and jewelry, suggesting they had paused to gather valuables before fleeing, a decision that cost them the seconds they needed to survive. The cities disappeared from human memory with remarkable speed. And unlike most great disasters, which leave scars on the landscape and echoes in literature, Pompeii and Herculaneum were simply gone, buried so completely that within a few generations, people forgot exactly where they had been. The name Pompeii drifted out of common use. The area was known vaguely as La Civita, an old place, nothing more. It was not until 1599 that an architect named Domenico Fontana, digging an underground channel to divert the river Sarno, stumbled upon ancient walls covered with paintings and inscriptions. He uncovered a few frescoes, then covered them up again, and nothing more came of it. The true rediscovery began in 1748, when King Charles VII of Naples, eager to enrich his royal art collection, ordered systematic excavations. Workers began pulling statues and frescoes from the earth, when the world slowly realized what lay beneath. In 1763, an inscription was found that contained the words Re Publicae Pompeianorum, the Commonwealth of the Pompeians, and the identity of the buried city was confirmed beyond doubt. The discovery electrified Europe. It was the birth of modern archaeology. But the early excavations were little better than organized looting. For nearly a century, the primary goal was to extract beautiful objects for royal collections, not to understand or preserve the site. It was Giuseppe Fiorelli who changed everything. Born in Naples in 1823, Fiorelli was a passionate, combative archaeologist who had already been imprisoned for his nationalist politics. During his 10 months in jail, he compiled and transcribed the handwritten excavation reports that had been recorded since 1748, producing a 3-volume printed history. When he was appointed director of the Pompeii excavations in 1860, he revolutionized the process. Instead of digging down from the street level, he excavated from the top of buildings downward, preserving everything in its context. He divided the site into numbered regions and blocks, creating a systematic address for every structure. He founded an archaeological training school, and most famously, he invented the plaster cast technique that would give the dead their voices back. Fiorelli understood something that his predecessors had not. Pompeii was not a quarry to be mined for treasures. It was a time capsule, and its greatest value lay not in its gold and marble, but in its ordinariness. The bread still in the ovens, the dice still on the tavern tables, the graffiti still on the walls. What Pompeii reveals, more than any other archaeological site on Earth, is the stunning familiarity of everyday Roman life. Walk the stone streets today, and you will see ruts worn by cartwheels, stepping stones placed so pedestrians could cross flooded roads without soiling their togas, lead pipes that carried running water to public fountains and wealthy homes, a sophisticated system of one-way streets designed to manage traffic flow. The thermopolia, those ancient fast food counters, had colorful painted signs advertising their offerings. The baths had underfloor heating systems. Walls were decorated with frescoes depicting scenes of mythology, daily life, and explicit eroticism that scandalized the Bourbon excavators so thoroughly that the most provocative pieces were locked away in a secret cabinet at the Naples National Archaeological Museum, accessible only with the king's personal permission. These were not primitive people living in a distant alien world. They were us, with slightly different technology. And yet, the eruption of Vesuvius did not merely destroy 2 cities. It sent shockwaves through the Roman world that resonated for decades. Emperor Titus, who had ascended to the throne only 2 months before the disaster, diverted imperial funds to the relief effort. The eruption coincided with a devastating fire in Rome and a plague that swept through the city. The Roman historian Cassius Dio later wrote that the ash fall reached as far as Africa, Syria, and Egypt. The psychological impact was immense. For a civilization that believed the gods controlled nature, the destruction of prosperous, temple-rich cities raised unsettling theological questions. Was it divine punishment? A sign of cosmic disorder? The poet Martial, writing in 88 AD, lamented the destruction of a landscape once beloved by Venus and Hercules, now buried beyond recognition. The disaster became a touchstone of Roman consciousness, a reminder that prosperity was fragile and the gods were unpredictable. Today, nearly 2,000 years later, Mount Vesuvius remains the only active volcano on the European mainland. It last erupted in 1944 during the Allied campaign in Italy, when American and British soldiers watched in astonishment as lava flowed down its slopes. That eruption was minor compared to 79 AD, but it served as a reminder that the mountain is merely sleeping, not dead. And here is the fact that should keep anyone awake at night. More than 3 million people now live within striking distance of Vesuvius. 600,000 of them reside in what Italian civil protection authorities designate the Zona Rossa, the red zone, the area most vulnerable to pyroclastic flows. The Italian government has an emergency evacuation plan that assumes 2 weeks warning and envisions moving 600,000 people by train, ferry, car, and bus over the course of 7 days. But volcanologists openly admit that predicting the exact timing and scale of an eruption remains deeply uncertain. A false alarm would cost billions and destroy public trust. A late alarm could cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The dilemma is paralyzing. And imagine standing in the ruins of Pompeii today, looking north toward the summit of Vesuvius. The mountain is green and gentle, its crater often wreathed in mist. It looks exactly as it must have looked to the citizens of Pompeii on the morning of their last day, harmless, beautiful, and bountiful. The soil on its slopes still produces some of the finest tomatoes and wine in Italy. Restaurants in the shadow of the volcano serve La Crema Christi, Tears of Christ, a wine made from grapes grown on volcanic terrain, just as Vesuvinum was 2 millennia ago. People build homes on the same geological fault line that swallowed their ancestors. The parallel is not subtle, it is not hidden. It is staring us directly in the face, and we choose, collectively and individually, to look away because the soil is so rich and the views are so beautiful, and the disaster is always something that happens to someone else, in some other time. The citizens of Pompeii would understand this perfectly. They lived it. There is a plaster cast in the ruins of Pompeii, a figure known as the muleteer, a man found near the Nucerian gate, apparently struck down while trying to flee. His hands are raised, almost as if shielding his face. His mouth is open. You can see the folds of his tunic. You can count his ribs. He is not a statue. He is not an abstraction. He is a specific human being who woke up on a specific morning and made a specific decision to run, and did not make it. When you stand before him, the 1,945 years between his death and your presence collapse into nothing. You are looking at a person who experienced the same fear you would feel, the same desperate hope, the same final understanding that hope was not enough. His name is lost, his story is lost, but his body, captured in that eternal moment of flight, tells you everything you need to know about what it means to be human in the path of something you cannot control and did not see coming. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD released 100,000 times the thermal energy of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It buried a city under 20 feet of volcanic debris in less than 24 hours. It killed a brilliant naturalist who sailed toward the danger rather than away from it. It silenced a dog that was still trying to break free from its chain. And then it preserved all of it, perfectly for us to find. The ash that destroyed Pompeii is the same ash that saved it. The force that ended those lives is the reason we can still see them, still touch the folds of their clothing, still read their love notes on crumbling walls. There is something almost unbearable about that paradox. That destruction became preservation. That death became our most intimate window into life. Empty streets, sealed doors, the terror of an invisible force descending from above. Does that sound like ancient history? Or does it sound uncomfortably like something you have already lived through? The truth is, every generation believes it is immune to the disasters of the past. Every generation is wrong. The mountain is still there. The people are still there. And the question is not whether Vesuvius will erupt again. The question is only when. I'm Tim, watching the past so we can understand the present. And together, we keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.